Hello and welcome to the first of two videos about the restoration of this Bally 4 Queens. In this first video we'll take a look at the processes involved in the actual restoration, and in the second video we'll take a look at the finished machine, find out what 4 Queens is all about, and finally watch some gameplay on the finished machine. So now, let's take a look at that restoration. Is that okay with you? Overall, this machine is not in really bad shape and should restore nicely. The back glass has some damage, which is mainly at the top, and minor damage in other areas. But the glass has been sealed by a previous owner, so at least it's not going to get any worse. Some repairs will be actioned later. Moving on to the playfield. The usual sort of wear near that kick-out hole, and around the pot bumpers. Those bumper caps are not the correct ones and will need to be replaced. Broken plastic, that will need to be remade. Some previous poor attempts at touch-up. When we see the Queens close up, we can see quite a bit of detailed repainting is required. I'm missing plastic, but the guy who sold me the machine was able to provide me with a good scan to help me reproduce it. More broken plastics, and the usual wear around the flippers. The apron on this machine is quite good, so I won't need to redo this one, which is a bonus. The cabinet is a bit marked, but not too bad. A lot of people would leave that as it is or try to touch it up a bit, but I will be going for the full cabinet restoration. Inside the back box is quite good too. In fact, apart from a few minor issues, this machine was mostly playable when it arrived. Under the playfield is a bit dirty, but not too bad. All the major items will be stripped and cleaned and plastic coil sleeves fitted. That's the coil that opens the zipper flippers. Surprisingly, although it looks really burnt, it actually still works, but it will be replaced. Everything on the baseboard is dirty but functional. The transformer looks a bit rusty, and the power switch and its plate are missing. The score wheels just need a clean and a little touch-up. The board will be repainted. Looks like someone has put a screw in there that's a tad on the long side. I decided on this occasion to restore the back box first and do the main cabinet and playfield later. After spraying with the base colour, the white splatter was added by flicking the paint off a wire brush. The first of the stencils for the pink I had made going into position. I hold them down with bits of scrap metal. I have tried stencil glue, but it either still allows paint to seep under the stencils or sometimes tears the paint off when removing the stencil. I've seen some people on the internet who swear by hair lacquer, but I have not had any success with that either. This is after the pink is complete and the green started. Then with the green stencil sprayed. The edges are never perfect at this point, and some hand finishing is usually required to tidy them up. Here's the cabinet after the painting is complete, being tried back on the machine. And then after it's been sprayed with 2 coats of automotive clear coat and polished. I can never quite understand the optical illusion that the pink areas look darker near their edges, but you can see the same effect on the original cabinet too. The panel is painted with a good quality white primer, which gave a very similar finish to the original. The completed back box sat on the cabinet. Then it was time to strip the playfield. Later, each of the removed pieces will be cleaned and repaired and polished as necessary. It's not very difficult or very exciting work, but it all adds to the final result. The pot bumpers will be stripped and rebuilt. In particular, the rings that strike the ball must be smooth and polished, otherwise they can damage the surface of the ball, which in turn damages the playfield. Then the slow process of painting begins, with the rings around some of the inserts. Any inserts that were not flush with the playfield were removed and re-levelled, but any that were okay were left alone and just cleaned in place. The biggest problem I had with the playfield painting was trying to repair the damaged pink areas. The colour had simply not faded uniformly. You can see here that some areas look pinker and others redder. This made it impossible to get a colour match, and my attempts to repaint around the bumpers was a complete disaster. Eventually I decided the only option was to modify the artwork and paint rings around the bumpers in a different colour. I made up some paper rings to get an idea of what it would look like. I thought about using the green, but my partner, who is the artistic one, suggested that they should all be the turquoise colour. She also suggested that they should not be concentric with the bumpers. I think this probably does look more in the style of Christian Marsh, or is it Marche, who did the artwork on this machine. And it also allows the new rings to cover the damaged area using a slightly smaller ring than would otherwise have been required. I sprayed the rings using a small airbrush and used a hairdryer to speed the flash off time between coats. The piece of stainless steel I found with a suitable hole in it makes a really nice stencil and forms really nice edges, much better than the plastic stencils I made to use on the cabinet. The 3 rings finished. Note they are all off centre of the bumpers I mentioned earlier. I think the finished job looks good and not out of place, and certainly much better than trying to use badly matched pink paint. Time to make the stencils for the cabinet, one for each colour. Carefully align in turn, and then each area of colour is carefully removed with a craft knife while trying not to damage the cabinet underneath. Out in the workshop, the colour is applied and again dried with a hairdryer. Scrap metal removed, then the stencil removed to reveal the completed job. I decided to do the white splatter after the painting on the cabinet. I did this by covering each of the coloured areas with the shapes that I had removed from the stencils earlier. Thereby the splatter can only land on the base coloured area as the original. After being sprayed with clear coat and left to harden for several days, the final surface was polished. That's the finished job. The hole I cut in the back of the cabinet, so a kettle lead style cable will be used, like the ones on later machines. All that is needed now is a quick rebuild. Before that, let's take a look at the clear coated playfield. I tried something new on this playfield. To repair the groove that is made by the ball around the arch, I used clear coat as a filler. I applied it with a fine brush into the groove. After a few days sanded it with 800 grit paper and then applied more clear coat. In the end the groove is now filled flat, but of course the discoloration remains. And of course it will wear again even with modern 2K clear coat finish. Those newly painted bumper rings. I am pleased with the detail on the queens. Remember how they looked before? I make metal leg protectors. I know you can buy them, but I made my own and polished the leg bolts. I decided I would like the coin door painted in the green colour. This turned out to be a nightmare, as once sandblasted to bare metal and then primed and sprayed green, the water-based paint reacted and made rust spots appear. After another sandblasting and a solvent-based X primer, I was stunned when the rust spots appeared again. On the third attempt, I sprayed some clear coat over the primer to act as a barrier, flatted that down and then sprayed more primer, then green, then finally clear coat. What started out as a small task took several days to complete. Having said that, I love the final finish, so I don't regret it. Take a look at the completed inside. As part of the rebuild, I also added some earth wires to the metal areas of the machine, as originally these machines were not earthed at all. transformer cleaned up, looks much nicer than it did before. I made and fitted a new switch plate. Units like pot bumpers, flippers etc. all needed to be stripped, cleaned and repaired as necessary. Here is a kicker unit before being cleaned and one after. I know I need to work on my one-handed camera style. With the playfield partly rebuilt, parts normally covered by the apron were all cleaned, polished and refitted. Once all the major components were fitted to the playfield, it was time to reunite it with the cabinet. Some of the playfield plastics needed to be remade. I produced the artwork and print it onto water slide paper. This is eventually transferred onto new pieces of perspex. The work involved in this process could be an entire video of its own. After modifying the artwork on the playfield, I decided to make another modification to this machine. I was always surprised that the area around the bonus kick-out hole was so dark. When I first got the machine, I thought it was the general illumination bulbs were blown. But only on closer inspection was it that I realised there were no lamps under the plastic. Strange, I thought, as there is clearly room for a lamp to be located here. It was only when I checked under the playfield that I found that the mounting bracket for the target is located exactly where the hole would need to be. I made some replacement horseshoe style brackets and drilled the playfield and fitted a couple of number 44 bulb holders. So that you can see the difference, I have only installed one of the bulbs here. That's my newly made plastic which has not been drilled yet. It only remains to complete the playfield plastics and then get the machine to function correctly. That doesn't sound like a big job when you say it quickly. Well, that's it for this video. Join me next time and we'll look at the finished machine after the restoration. We'll find out what Four Queens is all about. And finally, we'll watch some gameplay on the finished machine. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.